जो भी इंफॉर्मेशन हम लोगों तक पहुंचा रहे हैं वो सिर्फ इंफॉर्मेशन हो, मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन ना हो. हाउ डू यू डिसाइड कि कौन सा नैरेटिव जो है ये सही है?
When we look at history, are we looking at sahi and galat? Is history about remembrance? Or is history about understanding, a repository of human experience? Why am I studying about something that I feel like does not have my story?
So if you question, your nationality will be questioned.
That is an unfortunate fact that we are seeing rise globally.
My history is the right history, yours isn't.
The past is never going to be a single layered journey.
Certain facts are being removed from textbooks because it doesn't suit certain kind of narrative.
People who have not actually taken out time to do history, who are not even interested in it in schools, have suddenly now come out saying, "Jo padhaya sab galat hai."
What does Itihāsology mean?
Itihas means thus indeed it was. I will never use sensational language, and I don't see most creators who are responsible with their work doing that.
Responsibility lies in both the people. The one who's actually talking about the facts and the one who's consuming it. When it comes to science, so questioning is very important even there.
Yes.
So why not do the same when it comes to history?
There is a dwindling of criticism, of questioning, of interrogation. The past is consistently lingering, and its shoulders are always rubbing with the present.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Batkahi. Okay, so we live in a time जहाँ पे social media trends हो गए, social media Instagram reels हो गए या फिर viral tweets हो गए. ये वो सारी चीजें हैं जो एक हिस्ट्री को शेप देती हैं. एक हमारे पास्ट के बारे में जो फैक्ट्स हैं हमें उनसे ही पता चलता है. दैट्स अ गो टू प्लेस कि अगर हमें कुछ जानना है तो आइदर वील गूगल इट या फिर इंस्टाग्राम पे हम कोई रील देख लेते हैं. ऐसे में इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कि हम ध्यान दें कि जो भी इंफॉर्मेशन हम लोगों तक पहुंचा रहे हैं वो सिर्फ इंफॉर्मेशन हो, मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन ना हो. क्योंकि अब जो हिस्ट्री है वो सिर्फ टेक्स्ट बुक्स और क्लासरूम्स तक लिमिटेड नहीं है. लोग ऑनलाइन जाके भी उसके बारे में पढ़ रहे हैं. ऐसे में हमारी एक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी बनती है कि हम जो बात कर रहे हैं इट्स फैक्चुअली करेक्ट. बट देयर आर सर्टन पीपल जो ये काम एग्जैक्टली कर रहे हैं कि उस हिस्ट्री को फैक्चुअली करेक्ट वे में आप तक प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं, उनके पीछे के फैक्ट्स बता रहे हैं, उनके पीछे की रीजनिंग बता रहे हैं, एंड प्योरली उसको सेंसेशनलाइज करके नहीं बात हो रही है. ऐसे ही एक व्यक्ति हमारे साथ आज मौजूद है. सो लेट्स वेलकम एरिक चोपड़ा, हु इज अ यंग हिस्टोरियन and he's the co-founder of Itihāsology, which is a platform that talks about history, historical facts, art, which have been forgotten for quite a few years. So welcome to our show, Eric.
Thank you so much, Ishra. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we'll start with this. ये जो हमारा जो social media जो platform है, so Itihāsology, your page, that's on Instagram. It has a website as well, but largely the page, it's there on Instagram. जिसको भी इतिहासोलॉजी के बारे में जानना होता है, that's where they go to.
Yeah.
Now, since you're a historian, you're a young historian, you have studied history. ऐसे में आपकी एक moral responsibility हो जाती है कि जो भी facts आप present कर रहे हो वो factually पहली बात तो correct हो. Also, multiple sources होते हैं किसी भी narrative के. वहां पे हाउ डू यू डिसाइड कि कौन सा नैरेटिव जो है ये सही है, गलत है, या फिर ये नैरेटिव के सही होने के चांसेस ज्यादा हैं? सो हाउ डू यू डू दैट?
So Ishita, I think first is to understand कि when we look at history, are we looking at sahi and galat? Is that the lens that we are approaching the subject from? You know, when you're in school, half the time goes in wondering why you're even doing the subject. For most of the kids, उनको पता ही नहीं क्यों मैं ये नाम याद रखूं, क्यों मैं ये डेट याद रखूं. एंड जो डिस्टेंस क्रिएट होता है स्कूल में, उसकी वजह से हम समझ नहीं पाते व्हाई वी आर इवन डूइंग हिस्ट्री. इज हिस्ट्री अबाउट रिमेम्बरेंस, और इज हिस्ट्री अबाउट अंडरस्टैंडिंग अ रिपोजिटरी ऑफ ह्यूमन एक्सपीरियंस and figuring out that it was equally complicated, much like our lives.
Correct.
We don't flatten our lives into binaries. You know, we don't make it black and white. We live in grays ourselves. For some reason, we have forgotten to do that with people of the past. So much so that I think people believe that people in ancient India were waking up and thinking, well, wow, what a good day in ancient India. As if they were imagining themselves as these ancients. Everybody in their own time was a contemporary of their own time.
Correct.
With their context and complications. Now, honest admission. I am giving all this gyan about how students feel about history in school. I felt the same way. I was never able to relate with the subject. My biggest problem was that I thought, why am I studying about something that I feel like does not have my story or something that resembles our stories, something more about emotions or ideas or experiences of humans that truly shape the world around them. I remember in school, class 12th में एक chapter था about travelers coming to India. उस chapter में इब्न बतूता की बात हुई. Now people remember Ibn Battuta maybe through that song, but Ibn Battuta was of course a traveler.
Right.
And in this chapter, and I will say this here, these were really good books. At the time that I was studying them, they were really comprehensive, good books. They did as much as they could in terms of diversity. But you always have questions. So I used to have this question that when they're talking about Ibn Battuta, they say, he comes to India. He's fascinated by the Qutub Minar. And he's seeing everybody eat pan. And he's fascinated by that too. And then he falls off with the Delhi Sultan and he is jailed for a period and then he comes out and then he's sent off. And I kept thinking, for a traveler to be in a different land altogether, to be jailed in that land, what would he be thinking in those times, right? When we study the past, it's like we gallop through it.
Right.
Ye hua, ye hua, ye hua. But while that was happening, how were people experiencing that? So I think as an academic, your first responsibility is to people the subject. See it as the human experience that it is. And that's what my aim with Itihāsology was too. I realized that I want to talk about stories that I think are more representative, are more inclusive. But I also wanted to ask questions about the methodology of the subject and the lens through which people view this subject. Now, in terms of misinformation and disinformation, it is increasing by the second. I think we all know how easy it is to consume something in a 30-second reel and believe that. And of course, we've been hearing about WhatsApp forwards for, years now. What I have always said is Itihāsology or anybody else who's an academic on Instagram or on any social media platform, we are not your comprehensive guide to the past. You should not come to us to study for your exams or to understand all of history and its contours through us. I use a word for us called corridors. We will open the door for you. What we do, at Itihāsology is that if I'm interested in a particular story that I came across, and I find that story very funny and, very interesting, and I think, this is going to work for people. My first question is going to be, okay, but where does the story come from?
The source of it.
What's the source of it? And so once you start finding sources, as you said, it's not about correct or incorrect. It's about the fact that you are sitting with so many chroniclers who had so much to say. That was their job. They were paid to write.
Correct.
Now, even in Delhi's monuments, I use an example. People say कि Khooni Darwaza या Malcha Mahal or Jamali Kamali, these are haunted locations, right? Now, when you start wondering why they're haunted, as a historian, you start going to sources, कि ये story कहाँ शुरू हुई? Then you realize, oh wait, this is a part of oral history. This is a part of the way in which people have made their relationship with these places. But if you realize what the story is rooted in, it's a historical incident.
Correct.
अब उस historical incident को आप पढ़ने जाओ, उसके sources को आप देखो, you will realize that one chronicler is saying something, another is saying another thing. So people think that when you have abundant sources, you are rich on it and that it would be, a picnic for the historian. It is actually a difficult task to sift through it and to understand motivations, patronage. अगर आपने लिखा है, आपको किसने बोला लिखने के लिए? If you have written it at this time, what was your context? If you have written it out of personal interest or political interest, and sometimes and most of the times they merge. And it's all of these questions. So I always say that even if I have an interesting story to tell, my responsibility first is to see where does it come from? How was it registered? To bring in as many sources as possible for me to bring in. Leave my sources on each post. We always do that. Whether we talk about paintings, whether we talk about an incident, you will always find primary sources and secondary sources listed in our captions.
Basically citations.
Citations. But Unfortunately, not in the format I would like for them to be on there. But yeah, citations for people to understand that if you're interested in this, they've opened up a door for you. Now you open it, you be responsible enough, go to these sources, and one thing will always lead to another.
So the responsibility lies in both the people, the one who's actually talking about the facts and the one who's consuming it.
Yes, and as a consumer, whether you're a student or you're on social media, your job is to question.
Exactly.
And that can only come from a responsibility and a will to want to question, right? You can't just see something and say, this is my opinion right now. How dare you say it?
Okay, so here's the thing. We'll talk specifically about India. So the act of questioning, it's been discouraged now. So if you question, your nationality will be questioned. You're an anti-national because you cannot question the larger narrative. Now again, so it's our responsibility to question, but we cannot. And if we will, then you don't really know what the consequences will be. So as a curator, how do you present that information in a way that even if a person is unable to question, the fact is still not incorrect, or it's not sensationalized to the point that it becomes misinformation?
Well, you keep in mind that you're interacting with people, and you always assume that you're interacting with people who at their heart are curious. And I think curiosity leads to then everything. I tell stories because I'm curious about the past. What is my intention to be curious? I want to understand how were these people, who are our predecessors in many ways, were living their lives, and how the way they lived their lives have shaped us.
Right.
It's a curiosity rooted in the sheer fascination of knowing more about why I am the way I am. And I feel like I always work with the assumption that people are curious. I will not work with the assumption that people will naturally hate or naturally love what you do. And I think questioning then is also to assume that everybody has the right to question. The topic of it dwindling, that is an unfortunate fact that we are seeing rise globally. There is a dwindling of criticism, of questioning, of interrogation. Even on, I think, a few weeks ago, and it consistently keeps on happening, there are many debates on TV channels, on news channels, about some historical figure or the other. And the entire question is whether we should remove them from the history book or we should keep them inside. If people think this is the kind of questioning, then it's a bit odd. It's not to say that this is not valid questions, that these are not valid questions, but it is to say that what is your aim, finally, from asking something like this? Because you are revising the past in a way that, well, is impossible chronologically. The time won't alter. Plus, I think people forget about the butterfly effect, or things like even the slightest change in history would have meant something drastically different for us today.
Right, true.
So this question on removal or keeping matters in the past, these are questions, but I would say they're surface level. They are sensational questions. They are questions to provoke you. I feel like if you have that inherent curiosity, that will be your driving factor to ask questions that would matter to you, and at large, the personal is political. What matters to you as a human being and what has shaped you, if you question that, you also question yourself in the process.
True.
And you question your own place in society. And I think that opens up that box for you. So again, I think I work with the assumption that people are curious. I do not work with the assumption, even though I sometimes question myself because I do work on social media and I see a lot of responses to things, not only to our content, to my fellow friends and historians who are on there. But you realize that at the end of the day, you have built something and you have a responsibility, and whether this might be the dominating voice, it is not that other voices do not exist. And it is not that curiosity has dwindled. We need to just empower that a bit.
Okay. So, here's a personal question. So, as a curator, as a public educator, and as a historian, so whenever, so you wear many hats.
Right.
So we'll talk about that. So, whenever you talk about a fact, you come across maybe a painting or a historical narrative or a character from history that you feel is a very interesting person to talk about. Now, social media pe, the algorithm is very brutal.
Yeah.
So anything which is, which will make the readers, make the viewers curious, or which is controversial, it works more as compared to which is actually factually accurate, correct, or close to accuracy. Now, as a curator, how do you manage that balance? Like, how do you balance it कि मुझे sensationalize तो नहीं करना, but then views भी चाहिए ताकि जो fact बताना चाह रहे हैं, जो बात बताना चाह रहे हैं, वो लोगों तक पहुंचे. वो balance maintain करना, how difficult is it in today's time?
Well, first, I disagree with you. I have on multiple occasions used trending audios that were not sensational and it worked for me. I had to also dance in odd ways at some points to get some views. But to be serious about your question, see, one of the things is if you are on social media, you have to understand social media. I mean, if one is considering this as a part of their portfolio and as a field wherein they are using it to be their primary mode of communication and conversation, you need to understand its ways. The thing about controversial content, I don't think it's only that. For us, for example, what I try and do is to ask something in the first 3 seconds. Now, this question is not necessarily sensational, but it is a question that is personal enough to say that you would want to wait for this. I remember there was this story, and this is a story I really like. It's about Humayun and Babur, and it's about Humayun telling Babur, writing a letter to him, saying that you're a grandfather now. You must be very happy. He writes a letter to him, and Babur says to him, "Oh my God, congratulations." I mean, he didn't say, "Oh my God," but I'm getting the gist of it. He's like, "Oh my God, congratulations." But he says, "Humayun, why is your handwriting like this? Why are your writing skills so complicated? I had to read your letter so many times to understand what you were saying." To me, it's a very funny story. It's a story that is timeless almost. People will relate with it. And I remember that when I came across the story, I thought, how do I tell this? My first question was that, well, how many of you have problems with your handwritings or your writing skills while growing up? And how many times were you called out? And you begin with a point of familiarity, because I think the way in which you can root people in history or content that is based on history is to say that what you're learning here is not that distant from you, no matter how much you believe it. I do not think it is necessary to have fiery edits and a music in the background that you can't even then hear what the person is saying, and these glaring subtitles like they're screaming at you to necessarily bring people in. Touch wood, in my experience, it has been understanding what works for my audience, but also learning myself what are the ways of being here. See, I will agree to this, that when I began Itihāsology on Instagram, which was 2019, at that time, it was more fashionable because Instagram it used to be primarily a photo-based app, right? It was an image-based app, and captions used to work. And 350 words at that time used to feel comprehensive, or at least it was encouraged that you write, because that was the maximum amount, I believe, 300 to 350 words. Uske andar, you put your sources and everything. Over time, everybody's realized, Instagram is no longer an image-based app. It's a video-based app.
It's a video-based app, right?
So when reels and videos started to come before, the length was much longer. You could at least, I would see people making content that would go up to 4 to 5 minutes, and then discussing what they wish to discuss, and it being engaging enough for people. Now, each day you wake up to a message, it says, cover everything in 3 seconds, which is impossible. And I will not ever give in to that. But I will figure out a way, if I want to make sure more people learn about this. It's not only an Instagram thing, then you're thinking about attention spans universally. You're thinking about when something like questioning dwindles, a lot of extensions of it also dwindle. The idea of being patient with a book, the idea of meandering through your subject, the idea of just sitting with yourself and taking time out, it all dwindles with it. These are all extensions of those things. It's not only an Instagram thing then. So I am trying to readjust. I will never use sensational language, and I don't see most creators who are responsible with their work doing that. But they definitely are trying to say that I want you to know more about me, and I want you to know more about my subject. So I'll ask you a funny question in the beginning, and by the end of it, you'll be left academically rich.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what happens today is that if we keep social media aside, in general, whenever we study history, when we read history, so आज के time में the history is divided into left wing history and right wing history. Now, in such a scenario, what happens is that sometimes people are of the opinion that, okay, my history is the right history, yours isn't. And that is a very dangerous situation to be in. Because then you'll only believe the fact that suits your narrative, that suits your propaganda. Now, could you tell us something about that? If you've come across certain incidences, or if there's someone in your comment section who's talked about something like this.
I'll tell you a story to relate with this.
Okay.
There is a monument in Delhi. It's called Feroz Shah Kotla. This is a monument that comes from the Sultanate period. Feroz Shah Kotla. Thus Feroz Shah Kotla. उसके साइड में एक स्टेडियम और उसका नाम भी
Feroz Shah Stadium
था. तो अब for a long time, if you as a historian used to go to people and say, I'm going to Feroz Shah Kotla, they were very excited. Oh my God, you're finally getting into sports. And I'm like, no, I'm going to Feroz Shah Kotla, after which the stadium is named. In Feroz Shah Kotla, there is a pillar. This pillar was brought by Feroz Shah Tughlaq only. But it's an Ashokan pillar. It belongs to ancient India. It's a different time altogether. It was moved at a time when Feroz Shah Tughlaq couldn't even understand what's written on it.
Okay.
But he realized that this is important because it has these inscriptions. It looks old. It looks imposing enough, and I will reappropriate this as my message of power. He brings it to his fortress. Today, if you go to Feroz Shah Kotla, the fortress,
not the street. Okay.
Barely does anybody remember Feroz Shah Tughlaq or the Ashokan Emperor. What people remember is that this pillar is actually the Latwale Baba, the saint of the pillar. And he is the chief of the jinn that stay in Feroz Shah Kotla. Now, you may have heard of William's book, City of Djinns. You may have also heard that there are, as I said in the beginning, there are supposedly jinn and ghosts in every monument in Delhi. I do heritage walks, and so many times I'm asked questions about, okay, but who's haunting this place? But they say that this is the chief of the jinn, and there are many jinn who live in this monument. Now, these entities made of smokeless fire who live in these monuments are inhabitants of a historical site with multiple meanings attached to it. And everybody who goes to that site is going to take away a different meaning with them. But that is the process of understanding the layers of history.
True.
You will have oral history, you will have visual history, you will have primary sources, you will have secondary sources, you will have different ideas all around. As a historian, you cannot look down upon or look up upon any of these ideas that are in front of you. You have to confront them, you have to ask questions. Even this Thursday offering at Feroz Shah Kotla to the Jinn Saints, it's a very active part of the Feroz Shah Kotla monument. That's a way in which people are interacting with the past. And it has a larger story, rooted in other historical incidents. Feroz Shah Kotla has been a monument that has seen a lot throughout time. Ever since it was built, all the way to 1857, it has recurringly seen a lot of activities. Now, when you, as a historian, are interacting with things like these, you realize that the past is never going to be a single layered journey. And for your question now on right or left or Marxist or liberal, that's the process of historiography as it has been. It has become more, I think, omnipresent in our discourse, or we have become more aware of it because of how we define left or right now. But historiography as a process, which is the process of writing history, has always been about certain scholars coming from their own context, their own ideas, and applying that methodology to the past. And that will always have colors of what we believe is liberal, Marxist, left or right. That exists. However, the question is whether it exists with the will to dominate over other streams and take over media and take over thought processes and the psyche of an entire nation, or does it exist with the confidence that a method requires? That, I believe in this, but I'm up for a debate.
Right.
I will have a discussion. I will defend it. But how do you defend it? You have to defend it with rigorous scholarship. You have to root it in historical ideas.
Correct.
The problem is not different streams of thought. It's about what you do with them. Whether you're trying to overpower one over the other. And whether you are comfortable and confident enough to say, see, I believe this. If you believe in something else, let's have a chat. And I think that healthy discourse is missing.
True. Okay, so when it comes to discourse or discussions or history in general, when it comes to the textbook history, so what has happened in the past few years is that history is being erased. So certain facts are being removed from textbooks because it doesn't suit certain kind of narratives. Or if you talk about renaming places, again, the names that were there initially, so they do have a history with them. But once you rename a place, you change its history, the history that's attached to that name.
Yeah.
So,
again, I think this is such an important thing to ask, because it's not only renaming places, it's about the amount of time, energy, money that goes into things like these too, right? And understanding where the priorities are in terms of building a past, and whether we should be spending our energies perhaps in museumizing better, preserving our monuments which are in a sorrowful state, so many of them, thinking about the ways in which you're going to actually engage students. Who have you ever heard say, when I grow up, I want to be a historian? There is no possibility of that, because it's not even shown as a sustainable career path. It is not even, peppered with any sense of belief that there is a future with the past. And when you are living in a situation like that, where on one end, history is neglected in its tangible and intangible ways. At the same time, it's hotter than ever. Everybody wants to talk about it. Everybody knows about it. People who have not pursued their degrees in history, and I'm not saying this is a subject to gatekeep. Every subject should be open to conversation and discourse. But I find it alarming that people who have not actually taken out time to do history, who are not even interested in it in schools, have suddenly now come out saying, "Jo padhaya sab galat hai. Everything that you have learned till today is completely wrong. We will tell you the right history." Now, if the motivation behind things like these is that, then you actually do not care about the past. You really don't. You have a very, very odd understanding of what history is if it's all about proving yourself and saying, well, I have the power to do this, or I think that you're completely wrong, but well, I have nothing to back it up with. So with regards to name changes and revisions, see, with revisions, if revisions were done thoughtfully in terms of, again, thinking more about methods to the past rather than saying ye to hua hi nahi, and then sometimes they say this is from syllabus point of view. Now in history,
sometimes even ke ye क्यों पढ़े, इनके बारे में हम नहीं पढ़ रहे तो इनके बारे में पढ़ते हैं.
Yeah, they don't also counter in, I think, the fact that it's not कि kisko, who's getting footage. It's about realizing what an impact was made by certain stories, which is why they are omnipresent in your narratives, because it was not that they were in a silos, right? Any historical incident, any kingdom, any empire, any tumultuous incident does not happen in its own void or chamber, that you say, I choose to study this chamber and I choose to not study this chamber. They're not disconnected. The past is all about connections. So when revisions like these happen, which are not really done with understanding that, well, if you're going to study this chapter, but you move on and आप अगर उसके अगला chapter पढ़ रहे हो बिना पिछले वाला पढ़े,
हाँ.
what are you making sense of? You've skipped centuries. It's like, when
You're basically delinking the history.
you're delinking them. It's like, when you're in museums. I remember the school trip where we were put in a long line, and there were so many sculptures and paintings and all of that. None of us knew what we were looking at. But I remember one of the teachers with us was just like, okay, move. It was like, gallop through the past. Just see it for a second, move on. See it for a second. The idea to pause and see connections, that has never been taught to you as students.
True.
So if the focus with revisions was on, well, how do we make the subject relevant enough for a student to say, this is something I can do? Because education will then be the extension to actual possibilities in real life, right? Where you can think about history not only through exams that students spend so much of their life preparing for.
Just mugging up the facts, but never understanding them.
And even if they understand them, I can't blame them, because where have we been able to build institutions that support a dream, where until unless you come from great privilege, where you can actually do this and say, I am a full-time historian, or I am a full-time... Because if you tell somebody that you are a historian, you describe your entire job to them, and then they'll ask you, but what do you do?
What do you do, right?
Right? It's not sufficient to say, I am a historian, or I am a curator, or I work in the museum. And people think it's very glamorous if you've been able to do this. It is not. The ecosystem is surviving. It's not. It's trying to thrive, but currently it is in survival mode.
Yeah.
Because the ecosystem doesn't sustain it. So when you have problems like these, and you choose to focus on removing chapters on a whim and changing names, your priorities are unfortunately in the wrong place.
They are. So this is a personal point, because if I'll actually be very candid with you, मुगल्स का आप चैप्टर हटा रहे हो बुक से, अगर आपने मुगल्स का चैप्टर हटा दिया तो उसके साथ में जो कंटेम्प्रेरीज आए हैं आप उनकी बात कैसे करोगे? सो इफ यू हैड अ फाइट विद द मुगल्स एंड यू वन, और मुगल्स के बारे में हमको पता ही नहीं है, तो आप जीते किससे?
Redacted, how films,
right?
They just censor it. I think it would be like that most likely.
Most likely, right? Yeah. Even films for that matter. Since you mentioned it, so आजकल के टाइम में जो मूवीज बन रही हैं, so अगर वो किसी पीरियड ड्रामा है, अगर कोई भी, या फिर पीरियड ड्रामा नहीं भी, वो कुछ साल पहले से जाए, so यूजुअली जो मूवीज बन रही है वो एक पर्टिकुलर नैरेटिव को सूट करने के लिए बन रही है. Again, this is a very dangerous thing to do, because already जहाँ पे इंडिया में there's a lot of diversity and there's a lot of communal unrest as well. Now, if you make such movies, you're actually adding fuel to the fire, and you're not doing good to anybody. But then that's what the main aim is while making these movies. Now, how infuriating is it for you as a historian when you come across certain films? Whether you watch them or not, that's a different thing. But then, of course, you know about these films being made.
So, I think my first point of annoyance only begins from, well, if you're doing a period drama or if you're doing a historical movie, who are your writers? Or have your writers even consulted anybody that they think is a historian?
Correct.
I know for a fact, I mean, I may be wrong here, but movies like even Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, I think they consulted a range of specialists in figuring out how are they going to do a narrative that does justice. And you do have responsible filmmakers, too. Most of them tend to be independent though, who do say, well, if I'm making something, I need somebody with me who roots me in ethical scholarship.
Right.
However, it, I think, links to your part of making something sensational. Because if you're going to make a movie work, you will obviously, from a commercial point of view, use ideas that will stir some sort of an intense emotion, right? But it is such a huge disservice to sacrifice the past at the altar of delusion while you do this. because these are completely one-dimensional. And I think I wouldn't have to repeat this. This is what I've been saying throughout. That the moment you make the past about a single road and not the many corridors that open up one door and you lead to another and you're surprised, that is the canvas of history. The moment you take that away from it and you make it such a simple narrative, which for some reason is really motivates this new brand of people who call themselves alphas, and this idea of this strong sense of opinion on now we will correct all of this.
हाँ, अभी तक गलत था, अभी we correct it.
And now you've watched a film, you sat in that hall, you paid a lot of money for the popcorn, and now you've come back and you're so empowered by a movie that has not consulted any historian to make it, and it was based on history. So I think, as your question was how infuriating it is, well, I try not to watch them, but you can't escape the discourse because obviously you see them plastered all around and you see on news what's happening afterwards. Somebody watches a movie and they go ahead and they plaster a signboard or that's like, I think, a very minor example of, but what it does to the psyche is a larger question, what it does to your, to the way in which you think about yourself and the people around you. I think that is something that needs to be interrogated. So I think it is quite sad.
It leads to protest, it leads to communal disharmony, and you actually polarize an already polarized society.
Yes.
So it can never be good when you present history in such a format, in such a way. But then
and leave it open again, because I said that everything is connected. Popular culture also exists to be questioned, right? I think everything for me always comes to that, to curiosity and questioning. It's about, if you have the curiosity, though, even if media like this exists, if you've been given the tools to say that, you can have thoughts of your own. If you watch something, you necessarily don't have to come back believing everything that you saw in that, even if it was dramatically shot and edited very well. This is the same thing with reels too. I mean, it all connects, right? If you saw a 30-second reel, that was very convincing because the actor in it was so hell-bent on proving their point. You would perhaps just believe it because of the way in which it was presented to you. But if you were to give yourself the chance to say, well, I'm a complicated human being and I have a brain and I should be applying my understanding of the world thus far to what I'm seeing and consuming, and I can question it, I have an ecosystem where I can do that, then perhaps there's discourse. See, you can't really stop somebody from making a film, but you can definitely say what the aftermath has been and how do you deal with that. And for that, well, we need to go back to our first point.
So you can actually stop people from making certain kinds of films again.
Well, yes, that you can.
So if it suits your, if it suits your narrative,
because
good enough.
Those are the films that question.
Yeah,
so
and the people who actually watch those films, the ones that are being made and not the ones that are being shelved.
Yeah.
So those are the movies, the people who watch those films, so they actually belong to that certain mindset कि okay, we know कि यही सही है, या अभी तक इसकी बात नहीं हुई थी तो अब होनी चाहिए तो हम देखने जाएंगे. और सबसे ज्यादा शोर भी वही लोग करते हैं.
Yeah, and I think the way to deal with this is not, for me, I think it's sometimes I feel it's refreshing to see people say that I never took interest in history and I'm questioning it now, and what I learned, so maybe I want to go in it. But if you go through it through a commercial film and that is your entire source of knowledge, then it is not to gatekeep a subject, but it's to say that there are people who have spent a lifetime and continue to spend their lives, and it is disrespectful to the ethos and the soul of the subject if you think that after watching a movie you've learned everything about it.
It's more than disrespecting. I think it's a little idiotic as well, because why would you base your entire knowledge based on a film which you don't even know कि proper sources क्या हैं उसके, और like you said कि उसके research में क्या कोई historian था जिसको consult किया गया? Probably not, because again फिर अगर वो historian बीच में आ जाएंगे then आपका narrative shift हो जाएगा. Okay, so we'll talk a bit about Itihāsology now. So पहला तो basic question है कि you started Itihāsology at a very young age. I think you were 19, just out of school.
I was actually 17.
17. Okay. So ये idea कैसे है? Because that is the age when people want to have fun. So इतना serious topic उठाना कि we'll talk about history, we'll talk about visual history as well. We'll come to that as well. So ये idea कैसे आया?
Okay, I kid you not. And this is a story, whenever I tell it, people think that can't be true, but this is 100% true, so you have to believe me
Okay,
what
I
I'm
will.
about to tell you. Growing up, I was moving from cities to cities consistently and constantly. And my teachers used to always be puzzled about my creative output, because they would say, he's involved in everything: theater, drama, debates, declamations, editorial board, the student board. But what happens to the grades is it was an enduring mystery for me and for them. For me, not so much, because I actually, frankly, was not interested in any. I never imagined that I would be in academia. I never thought that I would pursue something that is scholarly in the slightest way. And I used to, however, love books a lot. I used to love stories so much. And, well, back in the day, I'm saying this as if I don't know how long I'm talking about. I think it still is present. But they used to say, so what will you do English literature? It is such an odd thing to say again, because once you start pursuing the arts, you really do realize what all goes in every subject. So I used to say, yes, I will do English literature. Why not? I love stories, and I think that is something that I'll do. So throughout my life, I was safe with this guard. Even though I'm not academic, I used to think I'll be able to do English literature. Someday something will happen magically in 12th grade and this will happen. The reality really strikes you hard, right? Once you do your board exams. So when I was in 12th, finally, it was a week before the exams. And my history teacher, my English teacher, my sociology teacher was just asking me, so what's your plan? Because after all these years in all your schools, you've given internal examinations. Thankfully, even when I was in 10th, there were no board exams.
Okay.
But 12th, however, there were boards. And throughout your life, you're prepped for that one moment in your life as a CBSE kid, that this will make it or break it. So 2 weeks before the exam, 1 or 2 weeks, I was thinking, okay, now I have to study. I need to I need to understand what is going on.
I mean, you have to pass the exam. So.
Yeah, I have to. So I began with history. And what I did was I approached the 3 books, and which is why I say I really did love those books. I still do. Whenever somebody asks me, I say, go to those. I give my personal books and say, start here. Beginning all the way from the enigmatic story of the Harappan civilization, making your way then slowly through the Mauryan Empire, the stretch of it, the whole complicated fabric of ancient India, the coming up of different Janapadas, and of course the social and religious aspects and lives that are developing between 600 BC to 600 CE. Then you go to these travelers who come in the early medieval period. Then you go with the Mughals, for example, the focus, which I think was so refreshing to see, the focus was on chroniclers and painters. The chapter on Mughal history in class 12, it began with making us understand who writes history and who wrote their histories. And there was so much focus on Abul Fazl in that chapter, the chronicler of Akbar, rather than the kings themselves, and on painters and what paintings meant. And I think that in many ways was a nascent interest that was sowed in me about paintings. Then you go to the fascinating architectural intricacies of Vijayanagar. And then you move yourself towards the modern period, and ultimately, of course, the Constitution, independence, partition. I read these, and it was in that moment, it was eureka, especially when I read this particular speech of Jawaharlal Nehru in the book from the resolutions that were proposed while making the Constitution of India. And he said that you cannot basically think about curating something like this without thinking about histories across the world. You have to think about the revolutions that have happened before. You have to think about all sorts of democracies and freedom struggles that you've seen before. Why are you sitting in this room? And that he also said that there is a sense of responsibility he showed towards our history and our diversity and our multifaceted nature. I think that excerpt, and of course, it dawning on me 1 week prior to the
Prior to the
history
exam.
exam that I have to study. I think studying all of that in a video, and this speech sealed it for me on that day. I come back from my history exam. I come home and I tell my dad, so change of plan. I know for the last 12 years I was going to do, or whatever many years you do school for, I was saying I'm going to do English, but I think I'm going to now do history. And he said, I mean, he was puzzled much like everybody else. And on that day, when I come back from my exam, I asked him, but I also want to do something interesting, because the one thing I felt missing in this was actually, even though they were so, I think what the books did, they equipped me with questions. This Ibn Battuta question that I pointed to earlier. So I had these questions too, but what's happening here? How are they feeling now? All of that. And I said that there is something missing. And I think I want to do something where I find stories that we don't find. It was so ambiguous, right, in the beginning. He said, why don't you actually start something on social media? I was in that second where I was like, okay, I'm going to start a page. And there was not even any questioning. He just said, call it Itihāsology. There was never, and this is a story, because when I tell people that I started this at 17, I thought that I would have an interest in history throughout my school life, and it finally came together in 12. No, it was the most surprising thing for me, but it's the best gift ever. And that was when I decided I'm going to do history, and then I thankfully got fine enough scores in my boards, and I enrolled at university, and yes, the rest is history.
The rest is history, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what does Itihāsology mean?
Itihāsology is a neologism. It is a way now that centers Indian history and art and sees how they shape the world. It means, Itihas means does indeed it was. So it is the Sanskrit term that connotes historical understanding or historical occurrences. And over the last few years, as it has developed, as it has taught me so many things about history that I wouldn't have discovered, I realized that its definition is also evolving, and Itihāsology has taken an identity of its own. But primarily what Itihāsology does is it believes, all of us believe, that our history is incomplete without people, camaraderie. I think if you make anybody feel left out of the past, that is a disservice to the subject. And if you are responsible of communicating the subject, that comes first. Itihāsology is about crossroads, intersections. I do not want to work in a silos. I have many other interests.
It's about multiple corridors.
It's about multiple corridors, but also corridors that don't necessarily lead to history. I have talked about ghosts so many times, it should be obvious. I love ghosts and I love ghost stories. But I also love fashion, and I also love music. And I think once I realized, history is everything that has happened, so all of this can come in these crossroads. What's going to be a problem? It is about connections that you build with not only institutions around you that are concerned with history, but also with institutions that possibly understand the importance of the work that you do. And so the museums and galleries that we work with, and the various individuals who are so empowered and impassioned about the subject, empowered through and impassioned by. And at the soul of it, as I said, it is about realizing that we have forgotten somewhere around the way that the past is consistently lingering and its shoulders are always rubbing with the present. And that leads to something. It not only leads to shaping our todays, but also all of our tomorrows. So Itihāsology, at its core, is about giving the past its complicated, multifaceted place, and it does it through its extensions. You've talked about the Instagram page, which, as I said, began as a depository of all these posts. Over the years in university, one of my professors during COVID said that you should maybe do a paper on Gandhara, which is this region which saw the rule of the Kushans, and under them and before also in nascent ways, the development of the image of the Buddha happened. And I was getting very interested in Buddhist stories at the time, and even Buddhist art, which was again one of the first ways of understanding that I might be interested in this. And she pointed out this sculpture of a bodhisattva and the Buddha with a mustache. And I was so intrigued, I was so fascinated that I realized that art is something that is going to come back. And it did, it surely did. So in the beginning, it was a primarily story-based repository. Over the years, it has really given art its place because we are sitting on a treasure trove of visual histories from across this country. And my responsibility, and everybody at Itihāsology, Kudrat, without whom so much of this is impossible, who I found in college, and she joined in and said that, I'm going to also take this dream forward. Of course, Rohan, Amir, everybody from my team, Sarah, they have a sense of understanding how is it that the past has to be communicated. And so much of our planning of now taking it on ground, which happens with primarily this man called Minhal and Rohan, who have been, at the backbone of planning how do we make Itihāsology also on ground. At the core, yet again, it is about forging a relationship with the people through history. So when you ask me how to define it, I am now confident enough to say that it is a new way, it is a new logism. I do not want to call it a platform, I do not want to call it a repository. I want to say that it's a way of looking at the past.
Okay, so what piqued your interest into ghosts?
My interest in ghosts. As an extension of Itihāsology, we've been doing a lot of heritage walks throughout. So three of the extensions that go beyond social media are experiences, podcasts, and the Itihāsology journal, which is also something I'll just brief about in a bit.
Sure.
But experiences at museums and monuments and curating different kind of events. When I began my monumental walks in Delhi, I began with, of course, my own intrigue and fascination with certain monuments. So Jamali Kamali is one monument that I was always fascinated by. Then slowly there was this story that took over all of popular culture of this woman and her children. This woman called Begum Vilayat Mahal. Actually, people from Lucknow would know of her. And her children, who occupied a medieval lodge in the middle of a forest in the ridge area of Delhi. And they stayed there. I mean, the son stayed there for years, claiming that they belonged to Nawab Wajid Ali Shah's
they were his
descendants. Descendants, and had a very complicated history. So they landed up at the railway station in the 1980s with their dogs and silverware and carpets, and stayed in that VIP. It was a very sensational story. Obviously, they will exoticized it, that she would stand in front of the train.
Begum Vilayat Mahal.
Yes, Begum Vilayat Mahal. And she would wear these big sunglasses and so on and so forth. It was a very sensational story. The New York Times then broke it and said that, this actually wasn't true. However, we have had more books recently, especially by this Abhimanyu Kumar and Alit. They have actually researched this case with depth and said that there are more questions that remain. I won't go into that. What I will go into is that when I got interested in these stories, it began with me being at monuments and mostly somebody asking, this is so interesting, is this place haunted? And the inner otherworldly charmed persona in me, I was like so fascinated. I was like, maybe there is, I don't know. And then I would go back home and I would search haunted. I would literally just search haunted places in Delhi. For everybody who's watching, please do that.
Okay.
Go on Google and write haunted places in your city. They will all be monuments, or mostly they will be monuments. And I was curious about what is it that haunts the past so much? Why are all these histories haunted? So the first obvious question was that is it because they're not visited enough? Is it because some of these are in a very sorrowful condition? Or is it because they have violent histories associated with them? Slowly, as I began exploring, I realized that, well, all of that is also there. But there's something more. I am interested in ghosts, yes. I'm interested in ghost stories, though. But what I'm interested more in is what do these stories tell us about the way in which people think about history. So if Malcha Mahal, for example, is haunted, so much so that in 2023, I believe, there were official haunted walks done here. I went for 2 of them.
Okay.
And, we were chased away by bats and dogs because it was
Okay,
sunset.
but there were no ghosts.
You will have to read my book for that, which comes later this year.
Will do so.
But what we did figure out was that throughout the experience, which was very ably led, I must say, it was curated very well. But I realized that throughout the experience, we'd become very comfortable with the ghosts, if there were any. But my interest in that was, well, what are the kind of questions that people are asking here? Because we were with a cohort. Similarly, I began to investigate Feroz Shah Kotla we've talked about, right? The djinns in Feroz Shah Kotla. But Jamali Kamali. Now, Jamali Kamali is a fascinating monument with this man called Jamali, who straddled the last of the Delhi Sultanate and the beginning of the Mughals. And he got associated with both of them because he was a fabulous diplomat, poet, emissary, traveler, connoisseur, wore many hats. And he realized that the wind is of the Mughals and he went with them because he had fallen out of favor. He commissioned his own tomb in Delhi, in Mehrauli, which is actually the first city of Delhi. Delhi is a city of cities. So in Mehrauli, he got his own tomb made. It's called the Gem Box of Delhi because it literally looks like a gem box. It is one of the most stunning monuments. It's always kept locked. And he's buried next to another man. These are both marble graves.
Okay.
I have been able to tell that the other man was buried later after Jamali's death because much like Shah Jahan in Taj Mahal, this grave disrupts the symmetry of Jamali Kamali.
Okay.
It's because it's supposed to be, Jamali's in the center.
Interesting.
This site now has so many stories. Some people are always curious about its name, Jamali Kamali. Because it rolls off your tongue like that.
Right.
But it has been a part of, again, oral history for a very long time. Then people started asking, who is Kamali? We don't know. Kamali is actually just Kamali because the other one is Jamali. We do not really, his name wasn't Kamali, whoever this man is. We do not know what their relationship was. We just know that they were close enough to be buried together. And now this has been seen in popular culture and many people have claimed it as a queer side of memory. It has been seen as one of those rare monuments where you perhaps found two people who loved each other buried together. Now, the historian is going to always look for sources and say, well, what are the other possibilities? But it is also to say, why is this not a possibility? I think one of the hesitations that people have with history is to just talk about love and just talk about the fact that we have had non-heteronormative ways of being before we were even defining things like how we define sexualities today.
Right.
And this whole idea of sexuality being brought from somewhere and sent somewhere and all these odd ideas.
As a westernized culture.
Exactly.
Like that. Yeah.
So that's one story. The other story, however, is that there are jinn who live there. And if you go here after a certain time, they will slap you. Now, there are many podcasts on this. There are many news. There was another haunted walk done over here many years ago. When I started looking at all these histories, I started to realize that they link to larger moments in time. So, the question at Jamali Kamali is of thinking, in the first sheher of Delhi, why are there jinn? And if there are, do they come from a particular period in the past? And can that then open up a canvas of understanding the past in a better way? When people come and tell me a ghost story or they ask me a question about a ghost at a monument, they're not asking me that simply because they want to be scared or get the chills. that is a way of connecting with the past. And if it can open up questions about our histories in larger ways, I think it is a very fascinating exploration to make. At Malcha Mahal, there is so much a partition story too. Then it is just of this woman who came with her children and stayed in a monument for so long,
So many years, right?
and got exoticized along the way. At Mutiny Memorial, the story is not only about the headless ghost, British ghost, who wears a khaki uniform and asks you for a cigarette, and you wonder if he's headless, where will he smoke from? It is also about wondering what this ghost tells us about 1857 and the end of Shahjahanabad. And at Khooni Darwaza, when they say that the ghost of Dara Shuko haunts there, it is the larger question of the place of Dara Shuko in today's history too. And why is his ghost haunting that particular monument? And that is what I was interested in. I was interested in figuring out these ghost stories exist. I can't deny it. My point is not to say whether the ghost exists or not. It's just to say the story exists, and I want to figure out what can this story tell us about the way in which we form a relationship with history.
Okay, so were any of your whys answered while you were researching about these stories?
Any of my whys answered?
Yes.
Yes, but also I believe in the consistent evolution of my own subject and my own questioning. So I know I will have many more whys. But largely, I think one is people also love to create reasons when there is no story to tell. So nobody will just say, I don't know. You know, it's very hard for people to say, I don't know.
So they'll concoct a story
They will
around
also
it.
make stories too. That's a part of, however, that's a universal experience. We've seen that across geographies, across centuries. For all of the monuments that I'm looking at, and I don't want to give in so much because all of you have to get my book, but in all of the monuments that I was looking at, I do think that I realized to a great extent why each of them are haunted. And it turned out to be that all of these ghost stories ultimately end up making the history of Delhi in itself. Literally all the way from Mehrauli to the collapse of Shahjahanabad and everything that it saw in the middle, from partition to emergency, from the various invasions that we saw come in, be it of Nadir Shah, be it stories of the Peacock Throne being taken away, be it the story of 1857, which has played such a significant role in so many of the ghost stories that exist in Chandni Chowk, in Red Fort, in those areas. So I have realized to a great extent why they exist. If you ask me whether I've seen a ghost there, you will have to wait for the
Your book. Okay. Okay, so moving on. So there's this common belief that history is owned by the victors.
Right.
So again, contemporary time, maybe the situation is very similar. The people who are in power are the ones who are narrating history, are the ones who are changing history to suit their own narrative. Now again, this is a very sensitive thing when it comes to India in particular, because there are certain facts that and then suddenly one fine day you are told that okay, whatever you've been reading so far, it's not right. And now again, like you mentioned, that we will tell you the real history. Now how can one distinguish what is real and what is not, if one can even associate such a term with history?
Right. Well, first with this quote, is it history the experience or history the subject? And are we talking about historiography again? Or are we talking about a sense of mindless revisioning that we mentioned briefly earlier? I think the question here is not to say that it is owned by somebody. The past as an experience in itself is free-flowing and it occurs. Much like the present, it happens in its own time and its flow is unstoppable and it can't be owned. However, how it's narrated, that will always be dominated
by the one in power.
And so, when one says victor, one is aware of the fact that it is the domination of historiography by a certain point of view. I was in conversation with an art historian called Katie Hessel, who's written this book called The History of Art Without Men. Now, this is almost a response to a very popular book called History of Art. And that book documented seldom any women, right? But it wasn't that the women didn't exist or that women weren't making art. It was that there was not even thinking in the process of writing in the time that it was being written that one has to include women. Um, and each time has shown us what dominates. We become more aware of the kind of absences in history by locating what has been omnipresent thus far. And it's always through counter questioning that, right? It again attaches to also the heteronormative dominance of in the subject. In schools, I think now it's changing, but pronouns used to be so gendered and so biased towards he, him. When you were growing up and you would read economic books or your biology books or any books that had morals to share, largely, or life skills to share, everybody was a he. Every achiever was a he, him. And then you realize these little things while growing up how exclusionary they are, how limited they are in terms of their worldview and in terms of making sure that other people feel that they're an ambit. Again, my question of why do we not feel people are a part of this? So, what you're saying, it is not to say that it is owned by a victor, but it is to say that the context of the time will always dominate the ways in which you perceive the past. However, I do think, and this is where I'm a bit hopeful, even though we say that questioning is dwindling, criticism is dwindling, at the same time, there is a sea of voices that is aware of what is missing. And it is through locating those absences that I think we will be able to say that, well, even if you want to present this point of view in history, I'd always ask you a question. I always go back to this example that Professor Nayanjot Lahiri talked about, and few other scholars have also talked about the Harappan civilization. When people say that the Harappan civilization had fabulous architecture, had the perfect drainage system, had these roads that were laid out with complete symmetry. Who was building those roads? Who was cleaning the drains? Who was building these buildings? And once you begin to think like that, which is what being a historian actually teaches you, I think we have complicated the definition today because there are a set of people who say, हमें सब कुछ पता है और तुम्हें कुछ नहीं पता और सब कुछ गलत है जो तुमने पढ़ा है. But historians who take their job with responsibility ask, well, okay, but what behind that and what beyond this?
So on a side note, even when it comes to science, so questioning is very important even there.
Yes.
So why not do the same when it comes to history? Why just believe something that has been told to you and not question whether, did such a thing actually happen or is there an alternative version of it? So I think...
Yeah, because people think history is static, right?
It's not though.
It is always moving, it's always evolving. As I said, that if historiography changes in accordance to the time that it is in, history changes with that. It is not that the experience has altered in the past, but your way of looking at it has changed. But the problem is that people want to believe in ये हुआ और ये गलत है सही है बैठ के लड़ते हैं हम न्यूज़ चैनल पर और फिर हम जाके रोड का नाम बदलते हैं. If this is going to be the trajectory of any conversation where people with completely ahistorical and delusional thoughts are presenting their grand views on history without having even spent a second with the subject and trying to comprehend its complexity, we are at a loss. But yes, it is to see the subject is moving along with you. As I said, the past rubs its shoulders with the present, and that rubbing leads to many new ways of looking at it. So once we realize it's not static, it's not frozen in time, कि जो हो गया वो हो गया, now let's figure out whether it's good or bad. But to understand its implications, complications, evolution, that is when we are going to be able to question.
I mean, when India was getting independence, so उस टाइम पे उन लोगों के लिए it was their present, but for us it's history.
Yes.
And whatever is happening today, even this conversation for that matter, अगर इसको 10 साल बाद कोई देखेगा या 50 साल बाद कोई देखेगा, for them it might be history for all you know.
I mean, I think that's also like too far ahead. I feel like everything that, and you know, this conversation then becomes more philosophical in many ways, and to wonder where time goes or how it evaporates. But I think that is also important to understand your understanding of your place in time, and then largely thinking that in this whole universe that you have found yourself being a part of, you know, this conversation taking place right now at this time, it does make impact, it does have purpose, but it is also a wheel in the histories of the various wheels that have come and gone. And once you understand that that is also your place in time, I think you also become a little less hateful, and you become a bit more empathetic, and you become a bit more understanding of people's contexts and ideas, because this is the time that you have in which you will learn so much about yourself and the other. And I always say that if you look at history, you cannot look at it with apathy, you cannot look at it with hate. Or even if you do, and that is natural, you will come across a violent incident, you have all the right to feel that rage and that violence. But where are you taking it? And are we using this now as a battlefield for people today to create differences?
To justify their actions.
And that you belong to this history and I belong to this history. That's again dividing time and experience, which I think is beyond this. I think when people hate, they really give themselves a grand place in this universe. But when people choose empathy and understanding, they realize that it's ephemeral, it's all moving, and let's understand our place in it and be kind to each other. We have very little time.
True.
Yeah.
Very true. Okay, so I'll ask a few more questions and then we'll end this conversation. So as a young historian, there's this certain belief that history should be told by people who have many years of experience, who have decades of experience. So, for example, Sohail Hashmi was there on our channel once, and he mentioned this line: "किसी भी बात को सिर्फ इसलिए मत मान लो क्योंकि एक बुजुर्ग ने वो कहा है." So now, as a young historian who started off at the young age of 17, so when you hear such kind of statements being made, how do you counter these statements? Like, have you ever been questioned?
No, you know, I frankly don't encounter, but I would say that I respect Suhailji a lot, and I think his understanding of, well, for somebody who's such a diehard Dilliwala is a gem, but overall what he's done for the subject and continues to do, and how he really respects his colleagues no matter the age, that is such an inspirational thing to see, and that's always inspiring. I have been lucky enough to be surrounded by academics who are in age much elder, but in terms of our exchange, very, very giving and very open with their wisdom. Two professors of art history who we were unfortunately lost, Professor Kavita Singh and Professor B.N. Goswami. Professor Kavita Singh and I mean, I would send her emails with just the most bizarre questions about, you know, Jahangir's painting in which he's looking at a spider fighting, and I'm saying to her, this looks like when you're scrolling through reels, and Jahangir just stopped at a reel scroll moment, and she said, no, this is what it is. Or always agreeing to be a part of a conversation, be it with Professor B.N. Goswami, whom I got the chance to talk to on 2 occasions, and one of them was a podcast.
Okay.
His passion for what he did in art history, but him being so again giving and so generous with his knowledge, and understanding that I come from a place of curiosity and I want to know. I have had experiences with academics across ages that have been so fulfilling that I think that question has stopped. I've never even registered it. But I also think it is about realizing, again, what are you trying to say about yourself? I do not think age will necessarily determine how much, as Sohail ji has said, कि अगर कोई बुजुर्ग कह रहा है तो सच बात नहीं है. I do not think age necessarily determines how much, experience surely does, but then experience does also go with age.
True.
I would always see myself in evolution though, no matter what age there is to come. I do know that at some point people will stop saying you're a young historian, and then maybe I won't be called on podcasts. But I
hope that doesn't happen.
But I do not think that is a question I've had to deal with, because I genuinely believe that I'm in the process of learning in myself, and what I'm doing through Itihāsology, and what all of us are doing in Itihāsology. All of my cohort from college was a part of it. Kudrat continues to be a part of it, and everybody else, Nandini Sharma, Ramola, Sameer, Hiba, literally the core that drives this effort. We all realize that we're consistently and constantly learning and questioning and being brave enough to be curious. So, if people do at times have a question or doubt like that, and this is for all young people who are doing things in their own fields, I think this can be a very belittling thought to your process of learning more and doing more. It takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to put your work out there, because you realize that this is at no age. When you put something out there, you give it to the world, and then there is no stopping that. Whatever comes from it, you can't stop it. So much like so many other things that I don't really think that much about, I haven't given much thought to it, but I would say that it is because of the generosity of the scholars that I've been surrounded with. And I would like to name all of them, but you get the gist.
I do.
Especially my college professors too, who till date support me in all my endeavors. I think that has been so satisfying that these kind of thoughts really don't come in the way.
And sometimes it's very rare to find such acquaintances, and which is good, which is actually really, really great. Yes. Okay, so one last question. Now, again, we'll come down to the sources, the core source of any historical fact that one presents. So I'll start with an example. So when it comes to Ramayana, so there are two versions of it. There's Valmiki's Ramayana, and then there's Ramcharitmanas. Now, what happens is the original one is the Valmiki Ramayana, but the more popular one is the Ramcharitmanas. And there are stories, there are narratives which are present in Ramcharitmanas but are not there in the original source. Now, in such a scenario, how does one actually, find the right source when it comes to history? How can one, see that, okay, this is the right source and I should be referring to this one, and maybe this is just a retelling of the original fact. So how should one do that?
Again, there are many Ramayans. There are regional differences in these retellings. There are oral retellings. There are performative retellings. Some of the ideas that we think come from the Valmiki Ramayana don't. For example, the story of the Lakshman Rekha, which is not a part of the Valmiki Ramayana. And there are various stories within stories in the Ramayana too, which are different in each tradition and in the way in which the tradition is told or performed or sung. And there are going to always be an array of sources that we're dealing with. The literary text, much like any other text that we deal with, is going to have various versions if it has had an imprint in the popular mind, and if it has become such an essential part of so many people's everyday lives. These are certain stories that you live with, and this is one of them. And again, I think it is not about right or wrong, what I have been stressing on throughout. It is about realizing that stories throughout centuries have adapted themselves and have been retold by the teller. And the Sutradhar, the storyteller, the chronicler, the weaver plays a very important role here, right? They are able to hold the strings, and they're able to captivate you and hold you and open up this fascinating world wherein you almost lose yourself in the magic. And I think the question should be more on how can you deal with the context of each source rather than pinpointing chronologies you can always say origins, but it's very difficult to find origins. The more ancient you go, the more difficult it is to point, well, where it all began. So till a certain point, you can say we know that there is solid authorship for certain texts, but that is not true for all, and that can also change with time, right? When you find other sources. So it is not about originality. It's about thinking about, well, possibly where could this story have taken place in the mind of the author or authors. And then over centuries, what was added to it? It wasn't that texts like these were written in one go. They evolved with time. There were chapters added, there were sections added, there were stories added, there were various mini stories added. And then as it went around the world, it got adapted into their stories. I mean, Cambodia has a Ramayana of their own, right? Southeast Asia has adapted that story into their own versions, and you see them in art and in literary culture. Would you say that's wrong? I think it is fascinating to see the kind of interconnections we have made throughout time. So it is about seeing each story and then thinking about how do I make sense of its context, and then what do I think about this story and what it does for me and how it impacts me. Because at the end of it, the past is a repository of all our stories and how these stories shape our life.
True. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you so much. And I hope आपको भी समझ में आ गया हो कि when it comes to history, there's no right or wrong version of history. There are multiple narratives to a fact. There are multiple narratives to a story. ऐसे में it's very important कि आप एक responsibility के साथ में उन facts को आप revisit करें, उनको पढ़ें and misinformation ना फैलाएं तो ज़्यादा अच्छा है. And बस बने रहिए हमारे साथ. मिलते हैं आपसे अगले एपिसोड में.